Hey everybody, this is Zach with Spooky Tanuki Games. For the entire month of October, we'll only be looking at scary games. So, I've got a confession to make. Dead Space 3 is my favorite game in the series. There, I said it. And I won't apologize for it. Sure, the original Dead Space and its sequel are much stronger horror games. They made us feel like we were stranded in space, with the nightmare fuel that are the necromorphs, without much hope of survival. Dead Space 3 had its work cut out for itself. Dead Space 2 improved on everything that the original lacked. Putting Isaac back in another abandoned ship would have seemed like a retread. How do you make a follow-up to a perfect sequel? The team at Visceral Games tried valiantly in 2013, but in the end, it didn't appeal to newcomers or diehard fans. Dead Space 3 attempted to paint a broader, more open story, and it kind of backfired. However, Dead Space 3 has some memorable moments that make it one of my favorite all-time action games. Dead Space 3 was released on the Xbox 360, PS3, and on the PC. I'll be playing the PS3 version. The story of Dead Space 3 opens up with Isaac being recruited to help destroy yet another marker. His lady love, Ellie, is in danger, and he rushes off to save her. Isaac meets up with an evil unitologist named Danik. Quick refresher, the unitologists are the cult that think that the markers are somehow a good thing. Danik wants to release all of the markers, and Isaac has to stop him and save Ellie. Luckily, Isaac meets up with the crew, and they fly to Tau Volantis, because that's where a distress signal is coming from, and they think it's Ellie's. Isaac also gets a partner named Carver, who is playable by you or a friend. He's kinda grumpy.
Who's that?
Boy.
Cute kid. You leaving
He's
behind?
dead. Danik killed him. And his mother.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Don't be. We're not friends.
Well, thanks for the rescue back there.
Try harder next time.
Once Isaac and crew get to the planet, the ship is blown to bits, and now Isaac and his team are stranded on the frozen planet. From here, it only gets worse. From the first moments of the game, Dead Space 3 feels different. The story is no longer about Isaac's survival, but his companion's survival too. This is also a departure from prior stories. There's some significant time given to the group that will accompany Isaac through the story. No longer are Isaac's interactions with characters two-dimensional. Character A calls Isaac on the comm to tell him to get to generator B so door C can open. There is real motivation for not only Isaac, but everyone involved. While I did enjoy the story of Dead Space 3, I don't want to overstate its impact. This is more like Armageddon than 2001: A Space Odyssey. The story is a step in the right direction though, and it's too bad that we didn't get to see where the story could have gone next. The gameplay in Dead Space 3 is simply marvelous. While each of the Dead Space games play great, the third installment is by far the best. Isaac is a miner, and therefore, all of his weapons are mining tools. This always bases Isaac realistically in the world. It makes sense that the reason he's so capable with his firearms is that they were once his tools. Dead Space 3 opens Pandora's box with weapon customization. None of the installments of this series gave the player that much freedom to customize their arms. You can create a wide variety of weapons based on the materials you find. The weapons have a top and a bottom slot. For example, you could have a saw blade on the top and a machine gun on the bottom. Then you can add modifiers to both the top and bottom to improve reload speed, damage, and status effects such as stasis or fire depending on what kind of weapon you want to use. This adds experimentation to the experience that none of the other games provided. Dead Space 3 allows you to carry two guns, and you'll want to choose and create weapons that complement each other. There are blueprints lying around the world if you aren't feeling up to creating a gun from scratch. There are still plenty of narrow corridors to squeeze down, but Dead Space 3 offers more open areas that allow you to utilize your movement and a limited cover system. The open arenas are an especially nice change of pace. Since Isaac has threats from 360 degrees, the player will need to decide what threats to prioritize, as well as tailor munitions to suit the needs of each situation. The other major gameplay innovation of Dead Space 3 is the multiplayer. This feature fits perfectly with the more open levels. I think everyone collectively rolled their eyes when Visceral Games announced this mode. In practice, Dead Space 3's multiplayer is amazing. A friend can join anytime while you're playing the game. One of you will be Isaac and the other is Carver. As you play along, sometimes Carver will stop, and if you're playing Isaac, you're left alone to fend off the incoming necromorphs. If you're playing Carver, you'll see all sorts of enemies in a nightmare-style level. I remember playing this with my friend, and we didn't know that this was going to happen. He just stopped, and at first, we thought it was a server issue. Then he realized what he was seeing was not the same thing that I was seeing, and we started going nuts. I was asking him, "What do you see? What's going on? Hurry up, we're gonna die." I can't think of any other game that implemented an idea like this, and I always think back on playing Dead Space 3 because of this unique quality. Sadly, there are only a handful of moments like this, but it is fun to mow down necromorphs with a friend regardless. If you have a friend to play with, check this mode out before the Xbox 360 and PS3 servers inevitably go down. Dead Space 3 was released in the waning days of the 7th generation, and it looks spectacular. With more exposed levels, Dead Space 3 has more to offer visually than its predecessors. The outer space sequences are particularly breathtaking. The draw distance and lighting are impressive. Once you're on Tau Volantis, the snow-blanketed tundra is full of high winds and blinding snowfall. The interiors of the buildings are detailed and feel lived in. Don't worry though, there are still plenty of creepy passageways that are the hallmark of Dead Space. Some of the enemy designs have been recycled from previous games, but there are some new additions. It is especially jarring to play the opening sequence of the game where you're blasting real people. Of course, the rigs that Isaac wears are as cool as ever. On the cover of Dead Space 3, Isaac is wearing a fur-covered rig. This sets the stage for some of the best rigs designed in any of the games. The suits provided to Isaac in Dead Space 3 play around with more primary colors. There are some very cool angular helmets that are a treat to look at. Your co-op partner John Carver has his own suits, which are cool. Dead Space 2 had more memorable suits, but the third installment has more innovative ideas. The lighting in Dead Space 3 is one of the major pluses in the experience. Dead Space 3 is not as dark as the other two installments. Of the design choices in Dead Space 3, I dislike the fact that Isaac spends so much of the adventure without his iconic helmet on. This was probably to make the player identify with him as a character more, but it takes away from your ability to feel fully immersed in some of the Dead Space 3 environments. The sound department in Dead Space 3 is the strongest of the 3 chapters in the Dead Space trilogy. The shrieks and screams of the necromorphs sound familiar to prior games. The weapons sound more or less the same as they did before. The 3-dimensional sound design is top-notch. The separation between enemies in the stereo is excellent. A special mention needs to be given to the outer space segments in regards to sound. While we know that there is no noise in the vacuum of space, that wouldn't really be satisfactory to the player. You need some sort of feedback. The sounds created to emulate sound in space are muted, soft, and thoroughly convincing. The soundtrack of Dead Space 3 is a joy to listen to. It trades in the isolated, maddening tones of the prior 2 games for a much more cinematic action score. This may not be as creepy as Dead Space 2's soundtrack, but it's much more listenable. There are horror themes present, but the overall package is less creepy. The voice acting in Dead Space 3 is on point, the roles are well acted, and there are no sore thumbs.
Isaac. Well, I'll be damned.
Where is everyone?
They headed for a research facility up the ridge. We found snowsuits, but there weren't enough to go around, so I decided to stay behind. There might be more down in the basement.
Dead Space 3 is an affordable game to pick up for the Xbox 360 or PS3. It'll run you under $10. That's a fair price for a 20-hour game. It has multiple difficulties, and your save file carries over to the next playthrough. The difficulty on normal isn't as high as previous games. You'll want to play the campaign a couple of times before you tackle the higher difficulties. The high levels of customization and the ability to keep all of your weapons incentivizes multiple playthroughs. I've played Dead Space 3 3 times, and I still have a blast loading up my old save file and playing a few missions with maxed out weapons. Dead Space 3 was a franchise killer, as well as bringing the inevitable decline of Visceral Games as a studio, which is very unfortunate. Dead Space from the beginning was meant to be a survival horror game, and the third installment tried to have a broader appeal. In the end, this was the game's major flaw. Without the horror elements and the isolation, Dead Space 3 ceases to feel like a Dead Space game. That's unfortunate because the combat was never better. The sound and visuals were second to none in the series, and we finally got developed characters and plot that the previous games sorely lacked. We owe Visceral a debt of gratitude for the Dead Space franchise. Survival horror games were more or less dead on the 7th generation of consoles. Resident Evil turned into a bro shooter, Silent Hill disappeared, and pretty much all of the major Japanese horror developers walked away from the genre. Dead Space was the first financially successful and critically acclaimed survival horror game in years. By taking the player into space and allowing them to play through some of the most memorable horror environments on the 7th generation of consoles, Dead Space reinvigorated a genre that was more or less dead. Dead Space breathed new life into survival horror and made as big of a splash as the games it so wanted to mimic. So that's it for the review. I had been planning to do this review long before I found out that Visceral Games went out of business, so it was timely and totally unfortunate, and I'm super bummed that we probably won't get another Dead Space at all. This is Zach with spooky Tanuki Games. Please remember that a like, a comment, or subscribe means a lot to me and of course the channel. Enjoy.
Rosen, counter down.
Exit beacon locked. De-shocking in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What the hell is that?
Moon. What's left of one. Rosen, I I see it!